Hope everyone's doing well. This video is on a 2019 to current Jeep Wrangler 2.0 turbo spark plug replacement. We are going to talk about the engine, pros and cons, what we've been seeing, etc. in this video. So stick around. It's not just a video. So I hope you enjoy it. Thank you. So my understanding on this engine, which we call the GME T4, stands for Global Medium Engine turbocharged four-cylinder, is this engine was Fiat Chrysler joint effort design, but looking at it, I'm going to say that a majority of this stuff is Fiat European, Bosch direct fuel injection. It does have a Honeywell turbocharger on it. It's twin scroll, non-fixed. It's a fixed geometry, so there's no variable vanes or anything like that. So we have an actuator on the turbo that basically just moves the wastegate open. And we have a surge valve. Some people call it a blow-off valve. This engine also has an EGR cooler on it, and it has EGR valve, of course. They've added some other stuff to it, but overall, this engine pretty much European. It's a generation 1 engine, so like all first generation engines, you're going to have some teething issues. Some things are going to fail. They'll get fixed with second generation. So just be mindful of that. If you have one of the first iterations of this engine, I don't even know if there's a generation 2 out yet. This video is being made in 2022, so maybe things will be changing soon. But yeah, this is a first stab at a high horsepower, high fuel efficiency, low emission engine to pull that much weight. So it's a big leap forward. Last time we'd seen a mass reduced four-cylinder in Chrysler's world was the 2.4 turbocharged engine that you would find in like the Dodge Neon SRT. Turbochargers used to be big with Chrysler back in the 80s. I forget what displacements, but 4 cylinders. And I would say from the 90s to the 2000s, Chrysler just got away from turbocharging, rather than the Neon SRT4, unless I'm mistaken. But so we're back into somewhat familiar territory. Back then it was Daimler Chrysler, and before that it was Chrysler, Mitsubishi, Chrysler LLC. So there's probably been some changes in engineering. Car companies these days like to team up and buy from third-party suppliers, buy fuel system from Bosch, buy a turbo from Garrett or Honeywell, wherever they want. And then different parts of these components are built to spec via the Chrysler engineers, Fiat engineers. So I mean, looking at this engine, it's pretty packed with technology. If you're trying to work on this engine, you're not familiar with European BMW, Mercedes, European engine designs, this is maybe something you wouldn't want to work on yourself, just because there's a lot of little things that overlap each other and can break easily. So drivability wise, they're a noisy engine. There's some clacking, some clanking. Don't know if it's valve train noise, not too sure yet, but it could just be the direct injection. They just haven't really fine-tuned it yet, possibly, but this is not a quiet engine compared to other turbo 4 cylinders. It's got really good performance. So if you're an off-roader and you have the 2.0, which there's 3 versions I'm aware of. There's a 2.0 turbo, there's a 2.0 turbo mild hybrid, and 2.0 turbo 4xe electric plug-in hybrid. So me personally, I want to keep it simple as possible. I would probably go with the base model 2.0 turbo without the hybrid system. So the mild hybrid is called ETORQUE, and we'll call that the mid-engine. The premium engine is a 4xe plug-in hybrid. The 4xe does not have a 12-volt starter on the engine, so it doesn't have a traditional starter. Keep that in mind if things fail. The mild hybrid ETORQUE mid-engine has a 12-volt starter that starts the engine on cold start. After that, come to a stoplight, it's using the motor generator that replaces the alternator to actually start this engine after the main start happens using the 12-volt starter. So in theory, the eTorque 2.0 turbo, that one, if the hybrid system fails, maybe you can, still operate it somewhat depending on the failure. The 4xe, being that it doesn't have a 12-volt starter, there's a lot more that can fail on that one. And the 4xe is also generation 1 hybrid system. The battery pack is not from any other vehicle. The 4xe's inverter is not from any other design. There's no other Chrysler product I've seen with the same high voltage system in the 4xe Wrangler. They may share some internal designs in the motors themselves and modules, but overall it seems pretty specific to the 4xe. So the eTorque system, we'll talk about that. That's a 48-volt hybrid system, much simpler than the 4xe hybrid system, and not nearly as efficient as far as economy compared to the 4xe. And some people don't even know they're getting a hybrid. Had people say, well, I didn't even know I bought a hybrid. Well, it's not really an advanced hybrid. It's a really mild hybrid, the eTorque 2.0 turbo in the Wrangler. So don't stress out too much, but that 48-volt battery pack, that has a potential of failing. If that does, you may not have any 12-volt system powering up. The motor generator is replacing the alternator, like I said. And so on the eTorque, you have that in place of the alternator. That motor generator is generating alternating current 3-phase voltage that gets sent to the 48-volt battery pack, which that might be DC voltage. I'll have to check on that. We haven't really seen that many issues with them. So basically, we have a 48-volt generator, takes the place of the alternator, 12-volt alternator that's on the base model 2.0, and that's basically what's going to charge your 12-volt battery up. There is a DC to DC converter in the 48-volt battery pack, which that battery pack on the eTorque is under the vehicle, not inside the vehicle like the 4xe battery pack. So that's a little bit of a downer, but it's really well encaged in a steel frame system under the vehicle with skid plates. So hopefully it's really waterproof. We haven't seen any failures yet. So I think they did a good job designing the eTorque system for the Wrangler. I've had one eTorque battery pack, 48-volt and a RAM, pretty much the same system. That battery pack failed. It did take a few weeks to get it. It was a couple thousand, but it was no charge to the customer. These are things to think about if you're purchasing an eTorque vehicle. How long is that warranty? I think generally it's 10 years, 100,000. 5-year, 100,000. It can vary. So check your warranty. Those components are not cheap. Usually generators up there in price too. And as far as the 4xe, that's a 300 plus volt battery pack. You're going to have, $10,000 to $15,000 to replace that battery pack if it fails out of warranty. That price could easily drop based off supply and demand, so don't quote me on those prices, but it's going to be a lot more to service a 4xe if it's ever out of warranty. The 4xe Wrangler basically runs a 2.0 turbo at a pretty constant RPM overall, so there's not a lot of varying of that engine. The eTorque 2.0 is going to basically have full RPM control compared to the 4xe. So in my opinion, the 2.0 turbo with the ETORQUE system is going to be working the engine harder than in the 4xe. Both vehicles, because they shut off and start up at a stoplight, they had to, make the oiling system work really well on different bearings and other things. So it's a huge amount of modifications anytime any car on the road has stop-start capability. They have to make sure everything stays well lubricated, stays cool at that stoplight on all these restart events, because overall, most engine wear occurs during engine startup, no matter what. That's where engine wear usually happens with the bearings. If you have an oil drain back issue because of a cheap oil filter, now your bearings are going to be starved on startup. It's going to wear out your bearings prematurely. Starting a vehicle, with low oil can cause all kinds of issues until it primes it after startup. So make sure that you have high quality filters. Make sure the oil level is always correct, and maybe don't let it sit for 2 weeks at a time. That's probably going to help on any engine too. So back to this. The spark plugs are going back in. If you watch the pictures of the snap-on bore scope, I was looking in the cylinders for any coolant. We've had a couple with coolant in the cylinders, cracked cylinder liners. So if you have a misfire code and the freeze frame shows that it misfired on cold start, really good possibility you got coolant in the cylinders, which is a bad sign. We haven't yet seen any real coil issues from the ignition coils. Spark plugs seem to be holding up, which doesn't always happen on a turbocharged engine. Overall, we haven't had a huge amount of issues on this engine. I would say it's probably a little less popular in California compared to the V6 3.6 liter. If I was going to pick between a V6, the Pentastar engine they call it, and the 2.0 that you're seeing here, I would probably go with the Pentastar engine, just because trying to do repairs on this engine, even for an advanced mechanic, may get costly, and time is money. If you're paying an hourly rate for your mechanic to work on this engine, say the turbo goes out, that's probably a 8-hour job. If the intercooler starts leaking, that's part of the intake. It's got a second cooling system on the 2.0 GME we're looking at. So it's got a low pressure cooling system, and that coolant reservoir is going to be clear. I believe it's going to be behind the driver's headlamp under the hood. And then that black coolant reservoir you see there is a high temp. So the way this works is you have a low temperature cooling system with a small reservoir. It's 5 psi cap, probably about half the temperature that this system runs at. Uses coolant with an electric pump. That pump is on the side of the block, I believe on the bell housing. It's controlled by the PCM through a LIN bus. That pump runs coolant through the turbocharger, through the EGR cooler, through the intercooler, and through the throttle body, I believe. So those are going to be kept a lot cooler than other engines because they have a second cooling system called the low temp cooling system, which is, a good design. I think we're keeping those temperatures a lot cooler compared to, let's say, the turbocharger on our EcoDiesel or Cummins. It's not, cool, low temperature coolant. It's a high temperature coolant. It shares it with the engine, so it's going to be above 220 a lot of the times. So if we can keep the coolant down in that turbo, in theory, that turbo should last a lot longer, because anytime a turbo gets hot, it coats the oil on the bearings, and that's why they say don't run a turbocharger real hot from, say, towing or having a lot of uphill driving, and then you immediately stop and shut it off. That's bad for any engine with a turbocharger. So you want to avoid that type of stuff. So if you can lower the temperature with a low temp coolant system like this one has, hey, you know what? More power to you. The What else can we talk about here? So I've seen a couple of them modified with oil catch can. Hey, if it works for you. Not entirely sure what they're trying to do with that modification other than, you know, maybe help out with a little bit of oil consumption. Having a good PCV system is going to help reduce oil sludging, so maybe that's her thoughts. But I mean, we're not seeing any major issues with the stock setup as far as the PCV system, so may not be worth the investment. I don't know yet. One last thing, we have basically a engine here that's twin scroll turbocharger. So it's going to have a kind of a race engine inspired turbocharger design.